Welcome to Reboot Reflections, where we share our thoughts and insights about relationships, wellness, and business. We're your hosts, Becca and Andrew. We've been married for 10 years and have plenty of knowledge and experience in our relationship, the wellness industry, and the business world. Grab a coffee and let's chat.
Hello, everyone. Episode 2. Wow.
I know, we're like really doing this.
This is a thing. Weekly schedule. We scheduled in our calendars. It's pretty weird to schedule something with your wife.
Yeah.
It's really odd.
Good quality time, though.
It's great quality time. I feel like it's the opportunity for us to just have a chat, for like an hour during the week, uninterrupted, I think is a really good practice. So, I think this is a really great idea that we've kind of stumbled into. So last week we talked about
Our career path.
how we got there, how we got here. Right?
Yeah.
So, and there was like not a lot of structure to it. And I think near the end, we were just kind of like, I don't even know if we're going to do this again, or if it's going to go out into the universe. But this time, I think we got a little bit more structure to kind of our discussion.
Yeah, I think as we kind of learn from what we're doing in the podcast space, we'll obviously adjust kind of, how we format things and how we have these conversations, because there's always a lot of things we want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
We have a group chat that just between Andrew and I, and we've got like a billion topics going back and forth. So I think for us, we want to structure it in a way where we can actually cover a little bit more material.
Not as long. Yeah.
Long, yeah.
Yeah. Last time it was long. Because I think structuring it the way that we like our podcast. Like I personally like my podcast to be about 45 minutes.
Half an hour, 45 minutes is perfect.
Yeah. I don't necessarily, I think 45 minutes is like a good goal, and that's something that we'll try to aim for, moving forward. I think that's a good amount of time. Enough for a commute. And I think the average commute is 45 minutes. I think I read that somewhere, but that was pre-COVID. So who knows what it is like now.
5 minutes from to office.
Which is something I think we want to talk about today. But before we get into that, I think it'll be good for us to, every week do like kind of a weekly recap of like what's been happening in our lives, what's on our minds. So maybe we'll start with that, and then we'll dive into today's topic, which is going to be about working from home. There's been a lot of stuff happening in the news around some in-office mandates, which is, I'm surprised because we're in, February of 2024 now. And I thought we were beyond that, but it's still kind of coming. So we'll dive into that topic. But let's start with what happened in the week. So Beck, you go ahead first.
I know. I got some very exciting news just yesterday, actually. So it's early March still at this point that we're recording. And I officially got a job offer yesterday. For a clinical dietitian position at a hospital. It'll be full time. It's a 1-year contract to cover a mat leave. But yeah, I'm really excited for it. It's one of those jobs I applied for because I knew it would be a really great challenge, and it was an area that I really was interested in. But I wasn't quite sure if I'd get it because I'm a new grad, so I don't necessarily have a ton of experience with complex cases. But yeah, I start on Feb 20th. And I do have, over the last couple of months that I haven't been working, as I mentioned in our first episode, I have been doing some work towards starting my own private practice. And I think that is something I still want to do on the side because I've invested a lot of time and energy and money now into recreating a new website and photos and all of that. So I would hate for that to kind of just fall to the side.
Yeah, because you've been working really hard. Like this, I know.
Told all my family and friends I'm graduated. I can officially take a break because it's been nonstop for 5 years, and then I didn't do that. But
I'm the same way. I remember when I was off for those 6 months, I just felt like I had to be doing something. For the first 3 months, I was kind of just, in my own head and just needed to get well. But then the last 3 months, as I was starting to get better and better, I started to become I'm like, what am I got to do something, right? And you just forget. And I tried to tell you this too, during this time, this 1 month of time that you had, really, because, you graduated in December, and then, you've got the holidays that happen. So nobody's hiring.
Yeah.
And then, you come back and it's early January and now it's early February and you've got a job. So you really only had a month, right?
True.
And I'm like, take advantage of this. Like the job will come, but like, and enjoy the time, watch trash
Yeah.
and just, do what it is you want to do.
I think it's just the curse of being the eldest child,
Yeah.
being an overachiever like we both are. I
hmm
think it's just, yeah,
It's hard to do nothing. It's
living with
very hard.
anxiety as well is like
Yeah.
your brain's just always like, oh, you could be doing more. And like, what if you don't get a job? Like, you should
hmm
be trying to do all these other things to be productive.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, anyways, I
Yeah.
got my job and I'm counting down the 2 weeks now. And
Oh
part of
my
me
God,
is
two
like, oh my
weeks.
God, I need to actually relax for these 2 weeks.
That's good. Now maybe you can.
I think so. Yeah.
Right? Yeah. Like maybe you will. Like, I mean, it is very, I mean, I remember yeah, it's the same thing when I was like looking for work. It was like, there's so much anxiety and stress of like, am I going to find something? Like, am I doing enough? You always do more, right? But I think the period between now and then, you're in such a perfect spot, right? It's like, I remember people who would leave, the corporate world and like, go to a new company and they would always kind of try to schedule like their start date a couple of weeks or even like a
Mm.
month after because there's that beautiful sweet spot where you left the company and you have a job secured and that time you've got literally nothing to do and no worry because you've got a
A
job
job
lined up,
coming up. Yeah.
right? So and now you don't have school. I usually when that happened to me, like I was still in school, so I could never really do nothing. And now, these 2 weeks, you should be doing absolute nothing, right?
I know. Part of me knows that. And then the other part of me is like, I've started the ball rolling already with my private practice, and I should probably try and get that finished to be launched before I start a full time job. And I'm like,
Yeah,
battle in my head. So we'll
really
see
is.
how it goes.
Yeah, I'll keep trying to,
You do
but
this shit.
just at least a week, at
Yeah.
least a week. I think that will get you ready to tackle what's coming up. But that's incredible news. I can't believe it. Wow, it's like the end of that one chapter, and you're kind of moving on to the next one. That's great news.
Yeah. So tell us what's going on with you this week.
What's going on with me? So I think I can't remember if last time I mentioned this, but some of my contracts coming up for renewal. And so, it becomes a question of, am I going to look for an extension opportunity to continue? A lot of the work that I'm doing is coming to an end with one of my clients in particular. And so, it kind of it gives me an opportunity to really, separate and look for something else potentially without feeling like I'm, leaving them high and dry. So it's a unique opportunity I'm in to kind of just look for a new challenge potentially. And so, I've been out looking and reaching out to folks in my network primarily and just kind of having an opportunity to just like catch up with people. And that's usually kind of how I like to do. I'm I am very bad at the whole like sales sort of pitching sort of thing. I feel so icky when I do, and I know I shouldn't.
I think most people feel that way though. So
Yeah,
it's
right?
out of the ordinary.
Yeah, I mean, I prefer to just have a chat with people. So the way that I kind of go out to try to find work is just really me having conversations and grabbing a coffee with people. And if they know of something that's coming up, they know what I do and that I'll be looking for something. Um, and so if they do know of an opening, then, I'd rather it organically happen, right?
And it's worked for you in the past. That's how you found your two contracts that you have right now.
Right. Yeah.
It's
And
just,
that's what I like.
yeah,
I like it that
connections.
way. That's just kind of my approach, and I'm sure there are better ways, more aggressive ways, but that's just not me. So I've been just trying to do a lot of that, and I think there's been a lot of opportunities that have come up, which I'm very grateful for. And so now I'm just kind of in the process of trying to figure out what it is I want to do. There was also a part of me that was like, been working very hard, I think since September primarily. Like it's been a really tough couple of months. 60 hours a week on average, at
At
least.
least, yeah.
It's like having a weekend or a weekend day to just myself has been a rarity since then. And so, obviously the thought has crossed my mind around maybe I take a month off and just try to, look at updating the brand, other service offerings that I can add into the mix for clients.
Well, and I think what's nice now too is knowing that I'm going to be working full time and I'll have an income finally after all these years. I think
Yeah.
it helps alleviate that pressure for you, who, you've been the sole income provider for us since I've been in school
Hmm.
for years now. And especially with the increased amount that you've been working this last like year or so, that's kind of the idea I've been pitching to you too. Is like if you're looking for some new contracts right now, like take your time. Like there's no rush to have to get something right away. If you want to take only part-time thing so that you won't be working as much moving forward, like it's an option for us, right?
Hmm.
Um
Yeah,
just
exactly.
even just give you a little break for this year or whatever. The beauty of being an entrepreneur is making your own hours and your own flexibility and things. So
Yeah.
you need to take advantage of that.
Honestly, it's really important. It is one of the things that I didn't realize, just how much you can, you know, set your own hours. That, as a contractor coming in, you're not stuck to the 9 to 5. In a lot of cases, you're not even required to go into the office. You can stay remote. Because for a lot of folks, especially with COVID, they've tried to decrease their real estate budget. They've gotten out of leases, sold buildings in cases, and so there's not a lot of space for people to be in the office. And with a lot of the in-office mandates that are starting to become more prevalent, they want those seats to go to their employees rather than contractors. And so, a lot of the times they kind of are like, okay, you can stay home, work remote. I'm lucky enough to have an office because I personally do like the split.
Yeah.
I like to be away from home, but so for me, I do kind of have my own hybrid working model that goes on. I'm like half in my office and half at home, and I like that for me and what I do, right? So it works out well. But I will say that now that I'm looking for jobs, there are a few places that are kind of asking me to come in, like
That's a
two
contract.
2 to 3 days a week into their office, which is kind of new for me. And I think that started to really happen around, the holidays. I think around like November, I've started to hear more and more folks pushing people to come into the office more than they were doing usually. And I was, kind of sitting on the sidelines being, okay, well, it's not me. And now it's kind of started to come to me to come into the office occasionally, which for me again is not a big deal. I don't mind going into the office if I have to, if it's required. You know what I mean? Like I think
Right.
that's the piece where it's like I just don't want it to be a checkbox. Like you want me to be in the office because that's just what it is, and I'm going to be sitting alone in an area of the floor with nobody else, and
Yeah.
I'm taking calls at my desk that I could have been taking at home, right?
I think it's important too because you'll be signing on and like agreeing to that when you're starting that job.
Hmm.
And I think a good segue into our topic today because there are several companies who are now mandating employees come into the office, even though they've kind of agreed to be working from home for the last couple of years and maybe going in once or twice.
Yeah, exactly. This give
Initially,
and take. It's
right?
like it's been kind of back and forth on it, right? It's like, before COVID, the idea of working from home was something that, you know,
Impossible.
yeah, I mean, like people would do it and they would always kind of assume that everyone's looking at them as slackers. Do you know
Right.
what I mean? That was the presumption,
Perception. Yeah.
presumption. That's not, is that a word? It is, but not,
Presuming.
yeah, it's a
Yeah.
word, but I don't think it's the right word. But, I I think that was what people assumed, right? And then COVID happened, and we made such positive strides in the idea that you can be productive at home. In fact, I feel like we we were too productive to
Yeah.
a point where people were scheduling meetings at, like, 7 a.m., 6 p.m., 7 p.m., expecting, like, you know, literally 24/7 access to employees,
Yeah,
you know?
our commute time turned into like working hour time now,
And you
which
missed the commute.
yeah,
I did. I
yeah,
was like, I couldn't listen to podcasts anymore. I was like,
book or
yeah,
just like literally sit in silence and decompress after a day.
yeah, it was a good reset that I lost, right? And so but I think there's so many positives that we'll dive into, but and I think a lot of negatives too. Both sides, nothing is ever, one way or the other. But I think one of the reasons we wanted to talk about this was and sorry IBM, but we're gonna put you on the spotlight.
And it was in the news,
It
so
was in the
you're already in
news.
the spotlight.
Yeah, I mean, I don't, you're not my client yet. Hopefully this doesn't change your perception of me. Um, but yeah, in the news, IBM, I think it was last week, or yeah, I think it was last week, came out with this, and it was just hitting all social media around them requiring workers who are living far away from the office to relocate by August. So let's set some context around the article because I think that's important. And this is what we're going to use as we talk about it. So there may be other pieces of information that we're not privy to, but this is the information that we have. So in the article, it says that those who are working remotely at IBM, other than employees with exceptions such as medical issues or military service who don't live close enough to commute to a facility, must relocate near an IBM office by the start of August. And that's according to the memo that employees received. That generally means, according to a source close to the company, within 80 kilometers, which for our listeners in the US is about 50 miles. So IBM managers are essentially the targets of this, and they're being forced to basically move closer to the office or find another job,
Mm.
right? This is, I think, in my experience, the most aggressive of the return to office mandate messaging.
Yeah, because it's most other companies I think I've seen have just said, like, you just need to find a way to get into the office like 2, 3 days a week, something like that. Whereas in this situation, it seems like they're telling them you need to move close to an office. And if you're not within that 80-kilometer radius of an IBM office, you can't work here.
You got to move.
Yeah.
Isn't that wild?
Which is crazy because people, even before COVID, were commuting
Yeah.
sometimes that far to their jobs. Like, you don't necessarily have to live within the same region
Yeah.
to work somewhere.
And I think if I understand correctly, based on what I've read, it's not necessarily that they're forcing people to move. I think it was that they had an exception for people who lived far away that they could work remotely. And that exception, I guess, no longer will apply as of August.
Right.
So you need to either come into the office, traveling, if you are traveling like 80 kilometers, which, is probably around 45 minutes. I think assuming you're going a highway speed,
Yeah.
I'm trying to do that math really quickly. I'm like 100 kilometers an hour, right? So I'm like, maybe it's like 45 minutes, maybe 45 minutes to an hour, which is quite a commute, actually.
Yeah.
Um, so, you need to come into the office or you need to relocate, which is just, it's a really weird thing to force and say to employees.
Yeah. Because I think during COVID as well, a lot of companies understood how well a hybrid model was working for employees and that people were in fact productive at home.
Hmm.
And they made it pretty clear that, this is being productive for us and effective. And if employees want to move and like want to stay hybrid for whatever infinite amount of time, then it's agreeable.
Hmm.
Because I do think a lot of people during the pandemic who were buying houses ended up buying houses that were further away from the office
Of course.
because they were under the assumption that working from hybrid would be like a forever thing.
I mean, we thought about it. We were in the position to move.
Right.
I think we would have, because like at the end of the day, we were close to the city, um, begrudgingly because I didn't necessarily want to be close to the city. I like land.
Yeah.
I like quiet.
Affordability.
Yeah, there was so many benefits, we live in a condo right now. I would love to have some space between me and other human beings. That would be great. I love human beings, don't get me wrong, but not this close,
And we had, when we first bought a home, we lived in a condo, and then
Mhm.
we were very lucky that we then moved to Guelph a while later and we had a fully detached home.
Yeah.
And it was just too far though,
Yeah.
because at the time I was working in Mississauga, we're working downtown. And so the commute was it was
Too
like 2
much.
hours for you one way.
I think we lasted 10 months at that place.
Yeah.
And we were
So
like,
we
we
ended
have
up
to move. Yeah.
moving back here, but because of the pricing, we ended up coming back into a condo.
It was wild, actually. Did a little bit of a tangent, but like
Yeah.
we went through kind of the peak of Toronto real estate. I think we when we were looking to move from Guelph to Toronto, we started out looking at detached homes or
Like
semi-detached homes.
townhouses at least.
We
Yeah.
we were looking at semi-detached, and they weren't like move-in ready, but work needed to be done, but we could still afford semi-detached in Toronto. And then as we were continuing to search, which was probably like a 4 to 6 month period,
Yeah.
we literally got kicked out of the semi-detached market. We then were moved to townhouses and then subsequently got basically kicked out of that market because it got too expensive. And then we landed basically in like, the kind of the townhouse maybe, but condo definitely sort of budget. And so, when we finally bought this place, we're kind of like I was kind of like, oh, like we should have moved faster. We could have been in a semi-detached. But everything happens for a reason, I believe. And we love this place.
Yeah.
But I do know that, any opportunity for us to move, I was like, yeah, I'm down. And that was what COVID kind of offered. And I know I'm not alone in that because everyone started to move. And I know the prices from what was affordable, an hour, 2 hours outside of Toronto core, started to climb in pricing, right? And so now those folks in an environment where now the real estate market is not great, you know, now
It's
you're
even
being
worse
it's
than
e-
it was when we were moving.
it's worse on the opposite side, right? It's now become this you're going to potentially take a loss. Offers aren't coming in as much as they were, back then you had bidding wars, remember that? Like
Yeah,
the
well, that's what priced us out of the
Oh yeah.
semi-detached homes, right? Because we would look at homes that were like 700,000 as a
Hmm.
listing price,
Hmm.
but we saw them get sold for, 900,000, $1 million.
That's
We just
exactly what happened to the Gladstone house that we're looking at.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
just came to the realization like we can't afford to put in bids on houses. Like
Yeah,
if
it's
it's
just
a
not even
listing
worth it.
price, that's like our maximum amount.
Yeah, and you would see people lowball the offers on the table. They would have a house up for 700,000 just because they knew that that would get a lot of attention. It would drive up the prices to,
Mhm.
the 1.2 million. And that was so we just kind of, we're not going to play this game. So, but now we're in the position where houses are on the market for months,
Yeah.
not being sold. And now the idea back then of a house going under asking was like
Ridiculous.
not a
Yeah.
thing. We're like, that's not possible, right? So the idea of having an over asking sale now is kind of very rare, if at all happens, right?
So
So it's a bad time for this message to come out from IBM,
yeah.
like, hey, you gotta relocate in a terrible market. Like
Likely closer to a major city, right? Which is where IBM offices are going to be found. It's just
exactly.
going to be so expensive.
Uplifting your family, like
Yeah.
what you got kids like are in school, like if they're close there, now you gotta move for you, like
Well, and if your partner, has a job that requires them to be in
yeah.
person, and now all of a sudden, yeah, you've got
So
to move that person, or like, what are you going to do? It's very complicated.
So what was the reasoning behind, this whole thing? And I think it stems from, and we'll dive into it, but I think at the end of the day, there's so many pros and cons to this whole thing, right? And it's kind of you've got this bipartisan view, that are forming, right? You're either of the school of thought that in office work is, the end all and be all and the only option that workers should have. And then you've got the other school of thought, where it's like it should be fully flexible. People should be able to work and whenever they want,
Mhm.
right? You give them the work. When they get their work done, they get it done, period, right? And so there are these kind of two schools of thought in the area. Um, so from a requiring people to be in the office, right? Few things that have always popped up, at least from what I've heard, right? The idea of like team synergy, right? It enhances team synergy. We get to see people in the office, right? Leads to faster decision making. and this culture of innovation. That's what people say.
Mhm.
Do I agree with that? I don't actually think so, because that would go to say, we didn't have any innovation during COVID-19. And I
Right.
feel like there was a lot of innovation that
Yeah.
happened during COVID, right?
So most innovation, I think, happened over these last few years, if
Yeah,
anything.
you had to
Everyone
like
had to pivot.
brick and mortar type of, when you thought about like banking, for example, right? You went from a model that required people to be in office to sign papers, and you couldn't get away from that. That was something that people were like, "No, we can't, we have to." And now all of a sudden it's like, actually we can. So let's try to find ways because we have to, or
Right.
we're gonna have to close our doors, and that's not possible. So it forced innovation almost. So I don't know if I necessarily agree, but I understand where they're coming from. This idea of like, hey, if we're together, then we can jump onto a whiteboard and we can just start, using markers and stuff and coloring in
Mhm.
and starting to put a bunch of Venn diagrams together, and all of a sudden magic happens. And so I kind of get what they're saying, but I don't necessarily think that is true in all cases. One, building a stronger, more cohesive corporate culture.
Which I would agree with. Like it's harder when you're virtual and online all the time to make and build those relationships with your coworkers and to really understand like the culture of your workplace. And I think being in person allows that more because you're more likely to go for grab a coffee downstairs with a coworker or have lunch together after a big meeting and just stay and chat with everybody who you're working with.
Hmm.
And I think that is what really is going to help build an actual culture for you in a business versus, being online is just it's way more difficult.
Yeah,
Like
I
even
agree.
for you when you had your last position at the bank, I think that was one of the things that was really lacking that made the job a lot more difficult for you is like you
Yeah.
never met the people in person that you were working with. You barely even talked to them because you were all so busy doing individual work.
Yeah,
And
onboarding is, like, weird,
yeah, you
right?
felt so like outcasted almost.
Yeah, yeah, you don't there I definitely agree with that point, I do believe that from a corporate culture perspective, it is easier to build a cohesive culture when everyone is together, because, yeah, people are super complex, right? And, it's those interactions that kind of help to define what that culture is, right? And if you don't have those interactions, then you're not able to determine what the company culture is, right? Because they're almost like siloed off, right?
Right.
The company culture, and I think that's the biggest misconception, or at least the way I see culture in corporations, is corporations can't really define culture. It's so hard to like set a culture because the culture is organically what comes out of the interactions of the people that you hire.
Mhm.
So you can build your culture in hiring practices. In my opinion, you hire a certain type of person, a certain type of skill set, and then them interacting together helps build this like corporate entity or corporate identity rather.
Yeah.
And that's the culture. But you can't go in and define it because it's too complex to define. There's too many variables at play. You try your best to just be like, this is what our identity as a corporation should be, and you try your best to hire for that, and then eventually it'll bubble into hopefully something of what you think, but it can come out any other way.
Yeah.
Um,
And I saw that a lot when I was a manager at Starbucks. And over the years of hiring, I learned that I needed to hire for like a specific type of like personality or like that culture that I was looking to build in my store. Because when I was a new manager, I just wanted to hire people who would be like efficient, who could work really quickly, learn really fast, to uphold all the high volumes that we were doing and all of that. But that culture that comes from hiring people who are a little more quiet is not really what, classic Starbucks culture needs to look like. And so over the years, you learn like, I need to hire people for who they are
mhm,
and how they're going to interact with everybody versus a specific skill set because we can teach that. We can teach you all the recipes and how to make things, how to work a little more efficiently, but I can't teach you how to have, an easy small chat conversation with customers or to get along really well with your coworkers because even that alone just makes it more enjoyable to be a customer when you see the baristas actually having fun together.
mhm.
So Yeah, it's definitely more about the people versus you dictating what a culture is
Yeah.
supposed
Now this obviously requires people like more than just you to be in the office. You know what I
to
mean?
be.
Like,
Yeah.
so, these mandates where you have people coming into the office, if you're there and then no one else is there, it's just as good as if you were at home, right? So
Yeah.
like it's kind of a little short-sighted, this idea of like, work for being in office mandates will generate more cohesive culture. It's like kind of, yeah, but like people need to be together, right? So
And I would say like your sister, like I won't name the company or anything where she works, but I think they're doing it well where they have like told each team what days of the week they have to come in on. So with your sister, for example, she has to come in on certain days of the week with the rest of her team members, whereas other teams are rotating. So it's not a full office every day, but at least you're always there with your team members. So you're not going to be alone and be the only person who's like in office while the rest of your team is virtual. So I think that's like a really interesting idea is mandating like certain days for you to come in and it sets a good expectation then as well.
and I think the idea here is, you know, trying to figure out a way to balance everything. People are unique, they've got their own priorities, and how do you find that right balance, of trying to make sure that the employer or the company is able to succeed while at the same time employees are also in a position where they can succeed. And I feel like now people have gotten that sense of like what hybrid work looks like. They've gotten so used to it and they've made significant changes to their life, financial implications, like, moving out, like we're talking about.
Yeah.
It's an interesting dilemma that I feel like we're going to be talking about for a long time. Now, one of the other things that they mentioned in the article, this idea that, if you're remote, you may miss opportunities for advancement or recognition than somebody who's always in the office and what they're doing can be seen constantly. And I think that comes up quite a bit, this idea that we're introducing office mandates so that we can drive more equity and fairness for employees, so that no one person is in the office more than others, so that they're not, you know, unconsciously being favored for promotions just because they're there more often and people can see them every day, right?
Yeah. And I think that's where I struggle with that kind of statement with the IBM article of saying that if you're in office, you're kind of like more likely to receive opportunities or promotions because
Yeah, they were very firm on
I
it,
I
which
just
was
think,
just, ugh.
if someone's in the office and they're only there even from like 8 to 3, let's say, but they're super productive, they get all their work done all the time, they're, performing really well, overachiever, all that stuff. But then you've got someone who's in the office from like 7 to 6. And yes, they're getting their work done, but they're taking more time to do it. But you're seeing them in the
Mhm.
office for those long hours. Like, I guess my challenge is people often look at the people who are in the office that longer period and say, wow, they're working so hard. Like they're here all the time. They're working these long hours. And yet, really, it's the person who's able to get more work done in the shorter period of time who is, in fact, likely a better performer,
I like
somebody
that.
that
Yeah.
should earn the promotion.
It's so true. It's so true. I actually had a manager, my first manager, tell me that statement. I remember, just like any kind of young, kid coming out of university, got their first job, and I was just trying desperately to like impress everybody. And so one of the things that, I had heard countless times was, first in, last out. That's literally all you need to worry about. And if you can do that, you'll make your way up and you'll be successful. I took that to heart. I didn't know any better. And so I made sure I was always the first one in and I was always the last one out. And I remember my manager, after like months of me doing this, came to me and basically, said to me like, um, hey, like I've noticed you're always in like first, and you just always come in last, like you're always the last to leave. Like, just want to make sure, like, is there anything I can do to help support you? Because is there a reason why you're not able to get your work done on time? And I'm like, what do you
Yeah.
mean? Like, I'm like, of course I'm able to do, where I'm just,
Trying to show that I'm a really hard
yeah, I'm just
worker.
trying to, be there. And like, I'm really committed to the job, doing a good job. And, she then told me that exact thing. Like, the way that you can show that you're capable and really good at your job is you're able to do your work as efficiently as possible. If you can't do the work in the amount of time that I give you during the workday, then you're not efficient,
Yeah.
which means that this work maybe is too difficult or whatever. And that almost kind of sends the wrong signal. And ever since then, it changed my whole perspective because it's so true. Like you said, it's like, I'm going to give you work that I think should take you an hour. If it takes you 3 hours to do it,
Something's wrong.
something's wrong.
Yeah.
And I've never been more like hyper aware of this than now that I'm in consulting.
Yeah.
Because now it's like I'm billing clients for work. And so I'm making sure that I'm super efficient with my time. Like I do not want, if a task is going to take me, an hour, it's going to take me an hour, right? Like, and I now can tell you exactly how long a task will take me. I'm like, this is an hour task. This is a 30-minute task. This is, 3-4 hour task, because it's like, it's so important to make sure that you're sticking within that budget, right? More so than a full-time employee, because they have that flexibility to be like, oh, they go over, and they're not charging the client or their employer for every hour worked.
Yeah. And I experienced that a lot too back when I was a manager, because we would we would have a 40-hour work week. We were salaried. And within that 40 hours, we were only given 12 hours of like admin time. The rest of those hours had to be like working on the floor, like side by side with our baristas and our supervisors, making drinks, talking to customers, all that stuff. But to fit in all that admin stuff that we had to do into just 12 hours a week was definitely really challenging. And especially as someone who was working in really like high volume stores, 24-hour locations, things like that, I definitely don't think that was enough time even for me. And I like to think that I was, one of the top performers during my time there. And if I can't fit my stuff into 12 hours, like something wrong with the way the system works. Because the thing was, for me, being in a high volume location, getting 12 hours, the same 12 hours are given to someone in a really low volume store who, their schedule would take them like 20 minutes, half an hour.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas mine would take me maybe like an hour and a half sometimes, especially with like holidays or, time off requests and all of that. And so it just wasn't fair to give every manager across the board the same amount of admin hours. But towards the end of my career, at least, I was able to get close to that 12 hours, which made me really like effective at my job, right? And a lot of managers struggle.
And I think that was such a good point, because it ties so well to this conversation. It's this idea that where I think companies are failing, in this whole work or in office mandate. I have no idea what they call this. It's like, it goes by so many different words. This in office mandate. Where I think they're failing is where they tend to fail is this idea of this one size fits all approach, because it's easy.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, you think about a big multinational company. This company has probably several hundred offices, several thousand employees, right? To try and figure out a model that's going to be customizable to each individual employee across each different region, culture, is impossible. Well, not impossible. It's incredibly hard and very resource heavy. Nothing is impossible with unlimited time and money.
Right.
But at the end of the day, sometimes you need a little bit more. A lot of the times, I would argue all of the time, actually. So I went completely opposite of what I initially said. A one size fits all approach just doesn't work. You need to have customized solutions. And I think the reason for that is because you're dealing with people.
Yeah.
You're not dealing with a machine, right? That follows a certain set of rules. Every individual is different. You can't say, all right, everyone needs to do this, right? That affects them personally. Like this, we're not talking about job descriptions here. We're talking about like stuff that's impacting now their personal life.
Right.
You can't do something that's a blanket approach for everybody.
Everybody needs to move closer to the office.
It's like, you can't do that. Like you can't do that, because you're taking away from what the individual needs. and their individual circumstances. So, and I know it's difficult. I know it's so hard, especially for public companies, have to worry about, their stock performance and all of these different things. And they have very strict, revenue targets and very strict, expense targets and all of this type of stuff. But at the end of the day, I know it's easier, right? And it will give you what you're looking for in the short term, right? But in the long term, it's going to cause significant impacts. So one of the impacts, of course, is, people leaving, right?
Yeah.
Like, somebody, if it was me and I had moved to somewhere and, I'm like, my kids are in, a school that they love, my
I'm working at a
partner.
hospital that's in
Yeah.
town or whatever.
Right. So now I'm like, I can't move closer because it's going to affect everybody else. And so I
Right.
need to find another job.
Yeah.
Right. How likely is that going to happen? And I'm sure they, started to think about that and they modeled it to say like, what
Percentage of people do we think are going
are
to
going to
leave
leave?
because of this decision?
This is a very aggressive, it's a very aggressive, m- you know, statement that they made. And it's also like when I think about overall how people would respond to something like this, I also can't help but look back at what kind of happened a few weeks ago with another
I was
podcast.
just thinking about that. Yeah.
Yeah, so this podcast is called Demoted. And if you guys have not heard of it, it just recently launched. I think last month, so January and um and it's with corporate Natalie and
Corporate bro.
corporate bro, right? So Ross, and I'm not going to pronounce your last name because your last name, like he's listening to this. Um, so I'm not going to pronounce his last name, but just because I will butcher it. But I've been following those two for a very long time, and if you don't know, their main channels is corporate.bro on Instagram, and then at corporate Natalie on Instagram as well. And they just do a bunch of like skits,
Yeah. About corporate life. It's really
corporate
fun.
life. It's hilarious. And I think Ross has a background in sales. And then corporate Natalie, I think, was a consultant and just does a lot of like work from home jokes,
Yeah.
I think,
Yeah.
primarily,
Yeah.
which is pretty hilarious and pretty aligned to like what we're talking about. And then the two of them got together and they started doing the podcast called Promoted. And they were in episode 2, just 2, like
We're
us.
literally just started.
Are we
Yeah.
going to get, anyway,
Oh,
are we going to get canceled?
sure.
I mean, we're not as big, we're not even near as big as they are. So like nobody even cares about what we say. But yeah, they went out. So they do a segment during their podcast where they get, questions from managers asking them to like give their opinions on a particular situation.
Mhm.
One of the questions that they received from a listener um, was this. So when asked to come in for an 8 a.m. meeting, my Gen Z new hire said, "Ugh, I can't make it. I have an 8 a.m. workout class. Should this be allowed?" That was the question that this individual
Asked not.
asked Natalie and Ross,
Yeah.
right? During the podcast. So they read it out, and then bro, 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 Ross says, "Are you fucking kidding me? I'm shaking, and it's not from the caffeine." Pretty hilarious. He's a funny guy.
Yeah.
And then Natalie says, "I don't give a shit about your 8 a.m. workout class. 8 a.m. is too late. Workout at 6 a.m., maybe 7 a.m."
Yeah.
Right? Now, essentially, that's the context they have, right? There was no additional context about like,
The only other thing that they did have context around was like this last minute 8 a.m. meeting that this Gen Z new hire was being asked to come to was literally like a big quarterly meeting. It
they
only happened every once in a while. It wasn't like a new thing every day we're having an 8 a.m. meeting.
they didn't even have that context. It was just
Oh,
they didn't even know. It was
okay.
only after the TikTok this guy comes in.
Okay. I've spoiled it a little then.
They they didn't have any of that. Was the only context they had, right? Very simply, the question was when asked to come in for an 8 a.m. meeting, my Gen Z new hire said, "Ugh, I can't make it. I have an 8 a.m. workout class. Should this be allowed?" That's all they know.
And then Natalie and Ross were just giving their opinion on the subject.
Fair. Like if
Yeah.
do I agree with them? Uh Again, I would need more context.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
I think I'd need more context to give a response there. But anyway, this guy on TikTok makes a stitch, which is essentially if somebody has a clip that they put on TikTok, you can then take part of that clip and then add your piece and then post it.
Yeah.
And it's called a stitch, right? So this person pretends to be Natalie's employee.
Yeah.
And
It seemed like Natalie was the one
was the
being this
manager.
manager saying,
Yeah.
my employee
My
doesn't want to
employee,
come in.
this is, yeah. So he interprets what they said in their clip as like, Natalie's talking about her employee,
Right.
right? And he basically does a skit pretending to be that employee, right? But he doesn't say anywhere that's a skit.
Yeah.
This is the point of why I bring this up. It's not the point to talk about who's right, who's wrong. Is this 8 a.m. workout class allowed? Blah blah blah. I don't care.
You can go listen to their episode on Demoted because it was really interesting the way they talked about all the backlash from it and all of that.
Yeah.
And their, view on it is what matters because they were the one in the situation.
What's happening to them is ridiculous.
Yeah.
I think it's terrible. And I think we need to all just calm down and relax. But anyway, the only reason I bring this up is because of the incredible amount of backlash that corporate Natalie and Ross got because of this idea. Because essentially, if we break it down, the guy on TikTok, he goes and does a sketch. It's this. As of what, like last week, it has 32 million views and over 50,000 comments demanding Natalie to apologize.
And Natalie doesn't even know this dude.
They don't even know each other, right? So that's kind of ridiculous. But the message that the guy is saying is essentially like, I shouldn't be allowed or I shouldn't be asked and required to or forced to come into the office outside of working hours.
Yeah.
I should be forced to do something that's going to affect my personal life for work.
Right. You signed up for this job knowing my work hours will be 9 to 5.
Yeah, nothing's changed.
Every day, like no outside work hours, all of that.
Exactly.
And it's fair.
Exactly. He goes on to say like, I work out for my work-life balance and my mental health, which I totally, totally understand. It's something that I do as part of my mental, trying to make sure that I maintain, a strong, mental wellness. I don't know.
Maintain your mental health.
Maintain my mental health. I get it. I totally understand what this person is saying. That's essentially the message. So everyone on TikTok agrees with this person, obviously, because it's, work-life balance, corporate, telling me to like do something that's going to affect my personal life. Look at this backlash, right? If I'm IBM, I'm looking at that backlash and I'm like, okay, great. Anyone who's Gen Z looking at this article never wants to be part of my company.
Right. Because they're going to be told that they need to like move locations to come into the office. And
I'm sorry, but that's your future people, right?
Yeah.
So, and people don't forget stuff like this.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And so you have to think if I'm IBM, what's this going to do to my quality of hires moving forward?
Yeah.
Right? Sure, I'm going to be able to meet my expense targets, my whatever targets I have in the next quarter, 2 quarters, 3 quarters. But what about the next year? What about the year after that? What is this going to do long term for my company, right? What type of people am I going to attract? And what type of people am I going to never attract?
Right.
And you can't quantify that. You just need to be aware that this is what's happening. People, once they hear this information, it's going to affect not only their decision making, but the decision making of everyone around. And what is that going to do for your and if I'm IBM and I see this, I'm like, okay, we messed up.
Hang on a second.
And I think I do believe that they messed up. I don't think it was the right call. I understand what they were doing. I understand why they came up with the decision, but I honestly don't believe it was the right call overall.
Because I think like, sure, there are people who want to go into an office every day, or there are jobs where you do have to go in every day, like my job in a hospital. I have to be there in person to actually see my patients. But you sign up for that willingly. I think most people now, coming out of COVID, want a hybrid work model. I think most people don't want to have to go into the office every day because of the personal and lifestyle choices they're living now, like post-pandemic, right? And so for IBM to just make a huge statement like this is, only going to impact them in a real, I don't know how to word it, but like in such a large target audience for them is
It's
going to be like, I don't want to ever work there. Like, I want flexibility. I don't want someone telling me,
it's easy.
yeah,
It's
but it's
easy.
the easy choice.
It's easy choice. I don't agree with it because I just think at the end of the day. So like let's bottom line this because we've been talking about it for a
Yeah.
while and we're way past our 45 minutes
Well,
our 45-minute goal. It's all right, we're new at this. So bottom line, okay? Becca, do you agree with what IBM did?
no.
No. I do not agree either what IBM did. I think it was a big mistake.
And then on the flip side,
Yeah.
do you agree with a more hybrid work model? Is that
Yes,
where you would go to?
I do agree with it with some caveats. I have not seen a company do this properly.
Right.
Okay. To date, I have not seen a company execute on a hybrid model properly. This is what I think we need to do. And, we as in like no one's going to listen to me, but this is if I had a company with a employee, which I do not. I have a company but no employees but
You're the
myself.
only employee.
Yes. I love my boss's approach to hybrid work.
Yeah.
Um People are complex at the end of the day, right? Which means you can't fit them in a box. You can't fit every employee in your organization into a box and say, okay, we're just going to mandate this and some people are going to be happy about it. And, hopefully, people are just going to be okay overall and we'll just move forward. It's just not that simple. This one size approach, when we're dealing with things that are going to impact people's personal life, is just never going to work. And I honestly think that we need to take responsibility for how we affect employees
Yeah.
and their life. When something like this happens, so like this requirement to come into the office or requiring people to, um, be available,
Whatever
24/7,
the day.
whatever.
Yeah.
You need to think about it from an individual employer, a group of employees. So, am I saying you have to go and say like, okay, John Smith, let's talk about your work
Flexibility, what you want.
requirements,
Yeah.
what your job is and what's required of that and all that kind of stuff. No, I think you can go down a couple of levels and say, okay, this job category, this type of work at our organization requires people to be in the office. And so those people will be required to be in the office.
Right.
There is a certain type of job that maybe requires around an average of 2 to 3, days a week. Some have to be in all the time.
Some have to be in never.
Some have to be in never,
Like,
right?
especially in a large organization like an IBM or an Apple or Google, like, there's definitely jobs where, like, people don't have to be in an office to get their work.
Exactly.
Data entry, like, things like that. I mean, I don't really know. I know. I apologize if I offend you with that. If you're that person and you think you need
Yeah,
to be
but
in
you're
person,
totally
but
right. I mean, yeah,
right?
data
Like,
and if all you do is data entry, you don't need to
you
be
don't need to
in
be
the
in an
office,
office. You
right?
might want to go to chat with people and your friends, whatever.
I don't need to be in the office. I don't
You
know
don't
why.
need to be in there.
Yeah, and at the end of the day, it's like this idea of like, promotions and not feeling like, they're going to be like that's on the employee.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like if you're an employee who wants to be promoted and you feel as though you're having a disservice because you're not in the office, go to the office.
Or like have a chat with your manager and
Yeah.
say, hey, here's the work I've been doing. What else can I do to show you that I'm going above and beyond?
Yeah.
Like,
Don't
what
don't
are the next
assume.
promotion?
Don't
Like,
assume that that's what the employee wants. I had an employee didn't want to be promoted at all.
yeah.
Loved what she did. Didn't want to do anything else. That's totally fine. And it's on. Don't impose this on the employee to be like every employee wants to be promoted. No, you don't know that, right? So stop trying to force fit certain things. And in terms of like company culture, like those change, and I think they need to change now.
Yeah.
You need to find ways to find a new identity now in this remote work environment. There's so many benefits to remote work.
Yeah.
There are so many benefits for being in person. But at the end of the day, do we really want to force people to do something that they don't want to do? There's so many things that can happen that are going to affect your company in a negative way if you go down that road of forcing people to do it.
Yeah. I
I don't
think
think it's the way to go.
I think allowing people some flexibility in their role and opting for more of a hybrid work model is only going to help encourage a positive culture. Because even if I think about my role working in a hospital, specifically as a dietitian, there's definitely work that I could do from home. There ends up being a list of patients that I need to call back because, they've been discharged already, but I had some important conversations I needed to do with them. I could probably do that from home, make a half day, sit at home from my office, make my phone calls. It's nice and private that way as well, because in a hospital, if you don't have office space, it's hard to find somewhere quiet and private to have conversations with patients.
Hmm.
Maybe not for every healthcare worker is this applicable, but there's definitely work that I could do that would be hybrid. And in my opinion, allowing that for certain healthcare workers will probably help alleviate some of that burnout that we're seeing in hospitals, because forcing them to be in quote unquote the office every day, seeing these patients and the difficult things they're going through and having to always be on your feet, running around in a very hectic environment with a lot of sounds and smells and lights and all kinds of things. It's overwhelming. And if we have the opportunity to help alleviate some of that by allowing people to work from home a little bit more often, why wouldn't you choose that option? It's only going to help make your employees happier.
Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's too much complexity to mandate it. You leave this up to the manager, you leave it up to the job that they have, and you leave it up to the employee to decide how if you need to force people to come into the office in order to A, get the work that you need them to do done, or B, generate a positive corporate culture, then you've hired the wrong people.
Yeah.
Like maybe that's a hot take, but at the end of the day, stop trying to force fit a solution without looking at the root cause of the problem.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the times your corporate culture comes out of the people that you hire, right? And how they interact with people, their personality, is it complementary, as I mentioned before? And if you need to bring people into the office, and I've heard this from managers too, where it's like, if I don't have this person coming into the office every day, they won't get anything done. You have other problems beyond just an in-office mandate. You need to put this person on some type of remedial action plan because they're not a good employee.
If they can't work independently and
Yeah.
you're having to micromanage them every day to make sure they're getting their basic job duties done, like that's a problem.
So I think we'll leave it at this.
Yeah.
I think it's one size fits all approach for an in-work model, in office mandate, whatever, is just not the way to go.
Not in today's world.
We
Things have
need
changed
flexibility.
So much. Yeah, we all need flexibility.
We need flexibility in the flexible model. Who knew? If you're having problems, with this that you feel like an in-office mandate's going to support, I feel like you're missing the root cause of your problem.
Yeah.
And it's probably somewhere around hiring, managerial effectiveness, that kind of stuff is honestly my opinion of the matter.
We would love to know your opinions as well.
100%, yes.
If you have an opinion on it, share it with us.
Please don't cancel us. Jeez.
Don't cancel us.
On the second episode.
Let's have a healthy conversation about all of this, because it does impact every single one of us.
Mm-hmm. So where can you have these conversations with us?
So you can find us on Instagram and TikTok at Reroute Reflections, or on Twitter/X at Reroute Podcast.
That's right, everybody. I passed the test. I am not a machine. If you were watching from episode 1, listening from episode 1, I am not a machine, so that's great. So thank you all for listening again. And remember, don't be afraid to reroute. Bye, everyone.